Zainal was remembered in her village as the kind-hearted teacher who always placed others before herself. She guided her students with patience, shared food with her neighbors, and lived by a strong sense of what was right. Her husband, Jabari, however, had a destructive weakness for gambling. At first, Zainal stayed silent, hoping time would change him. But when his habit grew worse and their savings began to vanish, she finally spoke up. She pleaded with him to stop, not for her own sake, but for the children she taught and for the respect of their community. Jabari did not take her words well. That stormy night, his temper snapped. In a fit of rage, he shoved her outside into the downpour and slammed the door shut. Trembling in the rain, Zainal's cries echoed through the darkness. Neighbors, alarmed by her desperate voice, rushed to their windows. Horrified at what they saw, they quickly called the police. Within moments, officers arrived, demanding Jabari open the door. He resisted at first but eventually gave in. Inside, what they uncovered stunned everyone. Hidden under furniture and stashed away in corners were piles of money that clearly weren't his. This wasn't just about gambling losses. It was illicit money from dangerous dealings. The police gathered the evidence while neighbors whispered in shock. Outside, Zainal stood shivering. Yet her strength seemed brighter than the storm itself. By speaking up against her husband's wrongdoing, she had not only endured suffering, but also revealed the truth. The villagers looked at her with deep admiration. She had defended not only herself but also the safety of many others. From that night forward, Zainal was no longer seen merely as the gentle teacher. She became a symbol of bravery. Children admired her even more, while Jabari, once feared, stood disgraced. Her courage transformed pain into power, her voice into a beacon of hope for others silenced by fear. Amara confronted her husband, Oyamide, after discovering he had secretly sold her late father's farmland without her consent. Her voice shook, but her resolve was firm as she demanded to know why he betrayed her trust and dishonored the land tied to her father's memory. Instead of remorse, pride swelled in him. Furious that his wife dared to challenge him, he dragged her to the door and locked her outside, leaving her to face the cold night while the world looked on in silence. Neighbors, stunned by his cruelty, whispered in disbelief after hearing her cries and the heavy slam of the door. Soon, someone found the courage to call the police. Sirens cut through the quiet night as officers arrived, demanding answers. Forcing their way inside, they searched for the truth. What they uncovered left no doubt. Scattered across the table were the land documents Oyamide had tried to conceal. Every page bore one undeniable fact. Amara was the rightful heir. The farmland was her father's gift, and her name stood boldly as the legal owner. The officers presented the evidence, and Oyamide's confidence collapsed before everyone's eyes. His scheme to profit off his wife's heritage was exposed. Though shaken, Amara stood tall as neighbors gathered around her. She had been humiliated, but the truth had lifted her higher. The land that carried her father's legacy remained hers, untouched by betrayal. In a single night, Oyamide lost everything, his pride, his reputation, and the secret deal he thought would remain hidden. The villagers looked upon Amara with admiration, praising her dignity and courage. Her strength became an example to others, proving no voice should be silenced and no inheritance stolen in secret. While Oyamide shrank in shame, Amara walked forward with her head high, honoring her father's memory and her own worth shining brighter than ever. Nia spent the entire day preparing for her 5th wedding anniversary with her husband, Adawale. She cooked, decorated, and arranged everything with care, her heart overflowing with love and anticipation. Wearing a dress chosen specially for the occasion, she believed it would be a night to remember. Guests arrived, laughter filled the home, and the table gleamed with the food she had lovingly prepared. Yet beneath her smile, unease tugged at her heart. During dinner, she found the courage to gently ask Adawale about his late-night absences. Her voice was calm, but her eyes searched for truth. Instead of honesty, his pride was struck. Anger flared, and before the stunned guests, he lost control, dragging her to the door and locking her outside. Nia stood trembling in her celebration dress, the night air cold against her skin. The same neighbors who had heard laughter only hours earlier now heard her muffled sobs. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, and whispers spread quickly. Calls were made, and soon flashing lights lit up the street. The police arrived, questioning Adewale and entering the house to uncover the truth. What they found shocked everyone. In another room was a woman, silent and ashamed. His secret affair stood revealed for all to see. The betrayal was undeniable. Word spread quickly, and all eyes turned to Nia. Though her heart ached, she stood tall, refusing to break. Tears threatened but did not fall. Her dignity outweighed her despair. Adewale's lies and cruelty were laid bare. His pride shattered before family, friends, and neighbors. Nia walked away that night, not as a broken wife, but as a woman of strength who faced the truth with courage. The feast meant to celebrate love instead revealed betrayal. Yet it also revealed Nia's power to rise above it. While Adewale stood disgraced, she left with her head high, the truth on her side, and a brighter future awaiting her. Kimmy, a hard-working market vendor, finally confronted her husband Tay for stealing from her earnings. From dawn until dusk, she toiled at her stall, selling food and small goods, her sweat turning into the coins that sustained their home. One evening, after counting her day's sales, she realized the money was gone again. Her chest tightened as the truth hit. Her own husband had been taking her hard-earned savings. Summoning courage, she confronted him in front of the market crowd. Her voice shook, but her words cut deep, exposing his greed for all to hear. Instead of shame, Tay's anger exploded. Humiliated by her boldness, he grabbed her, dragged her out of the shop, and locked her outside while traders and customers looked on in stunned silence. The humiliation stung, but Kimmy refused to bow her head. She pounded on the door, her cries mixing with determination. Her tears carried strength as the crowd murmured in disbelief at the injustice they had just witnessed. The murmurs swelled until the marketplace burst into a storm of voices demanding the truth. The accused, mostly women who had endured the weight of survival, stood shoulder to shoulder. They shouted with fury, denouncing the cruelty they had just witnessed. Their cries carried across stalls, spilling into the streets until police were summoned. When the officers arrived, they cut through the crowd and ordered Tay to open his shop. Inside, they searched with precision, determined to uncover what he was hiding. What they discovered left the crowd stunned. Inside bags and boxes lay not only Kimmy's missing earnings, but also the stolen savings of other women. The scheme was undeniable. Tay had been preying on hardworking traders, exploiting their trust, and stripping away the very means they used to feed their families. Gasps swept through the market as the evidence mounted, and the image of a devoted husband crumbled. Kim stood firm while officers led him away, her grief transforming into strength. The women cheered her courage, realizing her voice had shattered the silence that bound them. Inspired, they raised their fists demanding fairness, refusing to remain victims of betrayal. What began with stolen coins ignited a turning point. The women of the market found unity, and Kimmy, once disgraced in public, rose as their champion. The woman who sparked justice by speaking truth. Lindai, wife of Councilman Cunnell, uncovered his corruption. For months, she had noticed unusual files, private meetings, and unexplained flows of money. At first, she stayed silent, but when she realized funds meant for schools, hospitals, and clean water had vanished, she could no longer hold her tongue. In their mansion, she confronted him, her voice steady, her eyes blazing with disappointment, telling him the people deserved to know. But Cunnell, enraged at being challenged, lashed out. His pride as a councilman could not bear the shame of his wife tearing down his image. In fury, he dragged her to the door, locking her outside in an attempt to silence her. The heavy night carried her cries for justice across the compound. Guards heard her distress and could not ignore it. They called the police, certain something was deeply wrong. When officers arrived, they pressed for answers and demanded entry. Cunnell resisted, but their authority prevailed. Inside, they scoured every corner until the truth emerged. Piles of documents and receipts revealing stolen community funds funneled into his own accounts. The betrayal was undeniable. The man entrusted to lead had robbed his people. Outside, Lynn stood surrounded by neighbors and guards, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. When officers carried out the evidence, whispers raced through the crowd. The councilman who promised progress was nothing but a thief in fine clothes. The people's anger rose, but their respect turned toward Lindai. She had been the one to speak out, even against her husband's power. As Cunnell was taken away, Lindy's strength blazed brighter. No longer just his wife, she became the people's voice. The whistleblower who refused to let corruption ruin her town. Her courage restored hope, and her name was spoken with pride. What began as a lonely fight at home became a victory for the entire community, proving one honest voice could shatter even the deepest lies. At the town festival, A arrived dressed in joy, her heart lifted by drums, laughter, and music. But her spirit sank when she saw her husband, Oba, laughing too closely with women, his hands wandering where they did not belong. She approached him, calm but firm, asking why he chose disrespect on a night meant for celebration. Oba's pride swelled under the crowd's watchful eyes, unable to bear the sting of public correction. Anger replaced reason. When they returned home, he forced her outside the compound, locking the gate to silence her. Stood in the night, her fine dress damp from the cool air, her dignity bruised but her spirit unbroken. Her cries reached officers patrolling near the festival. They hurried to the compound, questioned Oba, and grew suspicious at his defiance. Pushing past him, they began to search. What they uncovered reached far beyond a quarrel. Hidden in his home were bags of money stolen from the festival, funds taken from the very community celebrating outside. The revelation shocked both officers and neighbors who had gathered. Whispers turned to angry voices. Oba's charm, once admired, was unmasked as deception. He had betrayed not just his wife, but the entire town. Though wounded, A stood taller as the truth came to light. The attempt to silence her had exposed his darkest theft. Officers dragged Oba away in handcuffs, while neighbors who once pitied her now showed respect. She was no longer just the quiet wife of a respected man. She became the symbol of truth that could not be silenced. That night, the festival drums still beat, but their rhythm told a new story, of betrayal's downfall and the rise of A's dignity. Kayamika discovered her husband Faye had secretly aided his sister in defrauding widows. She had always believed their marriage rested on honesty, but one evening while sorting papers, she stumbled upon hidden notes and receipts. The truth was cruel. The money Faye claimed came from business was stolen from grieving women who had already lost everything. Her heart shook with disbelief, but she found the strength to confront him, hoping for remorse. Instead, Faye's pride flared. His face twisted with rage as her words cut through his lies. Rather than confess, he dragged her outside and locked the door, abandoning her in the darkness. The night air was cold, her cries echoing down the street until neighbors stirred from sleep. Whispers spread, and soon the noise grew too loud to ignore. The police arrived, alerted by her pleas. They forced their way in and searched the house. What they unearthed was worse than anyone imagined. Piles of documents, secret accounts, and messages revealed a fraud network run by his sister, with Faye standing at her side. Each file exposed another widow cheated out of her last hope, another life broken by their greed. Still in the street, tears staining her cheeks, Kayamika watched as officers carried out the evidence. The same neighbors who once pitied her now looked at her with admiration. She had spoken the truth, even when it cost her comfort. And because of her bravery, the fraud that had ruined many lives was finally revealed as Faye and his sister were taken away. The chains of her marriage broke as well. No longer trapped in silence, Kayamika was free. The community stood beside her, offering support and respect, praising the strength she had shown. Though her heart carried the weight of betrayal, her voice had brought justice. From that night onward, she was no longer seen as a victim, but as a woman who walked through darkness and carried the truth into the light. Zuri returned home late from work, drenched in rain, and asked her husband, Malik, why he had sold her jewelry. Her clothes clung to her, her hair dripping and heavy, but her voice was steady as she confronted him. Those pieces were more than ornaments. They held memories of her mother and her wedding day. She demanded an explanation, but instead of guilt, Malik's eyes burned with anger. He felt cornered by her questions, his pride wounded by her courage to face him. In a sudden outburst, he shoved her outside and slammed the door, leaving her shivering in the storm. The rain poured harder, thunder rumbling across the sky as she stood helpless, her cries echoing into the night. Lights flickered on in nearby homes, neighbors peering through curtains. Their shock quickly turned to action, voices rising as they decided they would not let her suffer alone. Someone called the police. When the officers arrived, they found Zuri trembling at the gate. They knocked, demanding entry, but Malik resisted, arrogant enough to think he could hide the truth. The police forced their way in, determined to uncover what he was concealing. As they searched the house, they discovered receipts and slips tucked away, proving her cherished jewelry had been pawned, not to provide for the family, but to feed his addiction to illegal betting. The evidence was undeniable. Neighbors gathered around, their whispers filling the air as the truth unfolded. Their eyes shifted from Zuri, wet but unbroken, to Malik, who shrank under the weight of shame. The man who once paraded with false pride was exposed, while the woman he tried to silence gained the sympathy of all who watched. Though her heart ached, Zuri lifted her head high. She knew her dignity was worth more than any gold. She had lost her treasures but gained the truth, and her community stood firmly with her. Malik was left disgraced, his lies stripped away, while she became a symbol of strength. That stormy night, what began with humiliation ended with respect as Zuri walked forward with courage, leaving behind the storm that once imprisoned her. Namsa questioned her husband, Ayobami, about hiding her late mother's sacred necklace. It was more than gold and beads. It carried blessings, prayers, and the love of generations before her. When she noticed it missing from the wooden box where her mother once kept it safe, her chest tightened with fear. She confronted Ayobami, but his face hardened and anger flared. Instead of answering truthfully, he shouted, refusing to admit his betrayal. Their argument grew louder until relatives in the house turned their heads. Humiliated and furious that she had challenged him in front of family, Ayobami dragged her to the door and shoved her outside. The lock clicked, leaving her in the yard while whispers spread inside. Relatives exchanged stunned glances, unsettled by the cruelty they had just witnessed. Tears streaked down her dusty face, but her voice refused to be silenced. She cried out for help, her pain echoing through the compound. Unable to ignore it, one of the relatives picked up the phone and called the police. When the officers arrived, they ordered Ayobami to open the door. Reluctantly, he complied, hoping to hide the truth. But the search began, and within minutes the officers uncovered the necklace, carefully wrapped and hidden with papers revealing his plan to sell it. The sacred treasure, meant to stay in the family forever, was about to be exchanged for selfish gain. When the officers held it up, gasps filled the room. Disappointment in Ayobami weighed heavy in the air, while admiration for Namsa grew. She had stood firm even in humiliation, and her voice had protected her mother's legacy. The piece he had tried to steal now shone brighter in her hands, a reminder of the strength passed down through generations. As the police confronted Ayobami, his pride collapsed beneath the weight of disgrace. The relatives surrounded Namsa, offering comfort and respect, praising her courage. That night, she saved more than jewelry. She saved history, memory, and honor. Though betrayal cut deep, her bravery turned pain into triumph. Namsa held the necklace close, knowing her mother's spirit lived on through her strength and her refusal to remain silent. Aisha defended her little daughter when her husband, Say, shouted at her. The child had only asked an innocent question, her small voice trembling with fear, but Say's temper exploded, his harsh words breaking the silence of their home. Aisha could not stand by while her daughter suffered. She stepped forward, shielding her with her arms, demanding he stop. Her voice was steady, though her heart ached, as she begged him to show love instead of cruelty. But Say, blinded by rage and pride, refused to listen. In his fury, he dragged both mother and daughter to the door and forced them outside, slamming it behind them. The night was cold and empty, and Aisha wrapped her arms tightly around her little girl to keep her warm. The child's sobs pierced the silence, carrying into the street until they reached the ears of someone passing by. A police officer on patrol stopped when he heard the sound of a child crying in the dark. Following the voice, he found Aisha holding her daughter tightly outside the locked home. Shocked by what he saw, the officer called for backup and demanded entry. Once inside, the search revealed far more than anger. It exposed years of hidden abuse. Marks, broken belongings, and documents told the story of violence and neglect that Say had tried to bury. As word spread, neighbors who had once only suspected were now faced with undeniable proof of the pain Aisha and her daughter had endured. Their hearts turned toward her with sympathy, and fury rose against the man who had caused so much harm. As officers led Say away, his power dissolved into disgrace. Aisha stood with her daughter clinging to her side, shaken but unbroken. Authorities granted her custody and protection, ensuring her freedom at last. What began in fear ended in hope, as mother and daughter walked away from the darkness together. That night, Aisha's courage gave her child a new life, and the community no longer saw her as a victim, but as a mother who fought with love, and won. Hi friends, thank you for staying until the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. See you next time. Goodbye.